Where did the idea come from that Jesus Christ was Michael the Archangel, and what methods have been used to continue this teaching? The roots of both the Seventh-day Adventists as well as the Jehovah's Witnesses and their founders Ellen G. White and Charles Taze Russell go back to the Millerite movement. The Millerite movement was begun by a man named William Miller, who believed that Jesus would return in around the year 1843. When Jesus didn't return that year, the date was recalculated to March of 1844, and then again to October 22nd, 1844. Because of this, October 22nd, 1844 became known as the Great Disappointment. It was a major event in the history of the Millerite movement, and is very similar to the year 1975 for the Jehovah's Witnesses. Unlike 1975 with the Jehovah's Witnesses, however, the failure of the 1844 prophecy led to many unfortunate acts of violence against Millerites, including the burning of churches, armed mob violence, and murder. Miller and the Millerites were left as a disappointed and shattered people. Again, much like the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Millerites later, in 1865, began promoting new dates for the Second Coming. George Storrs of Brooklyn, New York, seemed to believe that the new date would be 1870, while another group headed by N.H. Barber of Rochester, New York, believed it would probably be 1873 or 1874. He published this calculation in a periodical called the Herald of the Morning. It was sort of the watchtower of its time. George Storrs had his own magazine as well, known as the Bible Examiner. Charles Taze Russell himself said that it was very influential. In fact, he referred to George Storrs as one of his brothers. Russell began studying these various magazines and tracts and theories. It was in 1874 that he had a very fateful meeting. He met Nelson H. Barber. It was from him that he learned of the idea that Christ had returned invisibly in 1874. This had been Barber's explanation for why his prediction had not come true. Around this time his magazine began to fail as many readers refused to accept an invisible second coming. As you probably know, this was the exact same explanation that was later used when the 1914 prediction failed to occur. Shifting to another important person in our story, Ellen G. White came from a family of Methodists. When she was 9, she was struck in the face by a rock that was thrown from a student at her school. She was left disfigured. She went into a coma for 3 weeks, and for her entire life she suffered from various sorts of health problems, including nervousness, tremors, and dizziness. Then, during the 1840s, her family became involved with the Millerite Adventists, the same as Russell would later. White's earlier accident, in addition to the health problems it caused, also caused her to enter into visions. She herself said that it was this blow to the head which allowed her to see things in heaven and speak with Jesus. In 1844, one of the original dates, the date that came to be known as the Great Disappointment with the Millerite Adventists, she had her first vision. In this vision, it was explained that 1844 was not a failure at all. In fact, it marked the beginning of a very special time of preparation. She wasn't told that it was the invisible presence of Christ, from what I can see, but it was a new era, a new eon, the one that would lead to the true coming of Christ. During this vision, she was told that upon Armageddon, it was only the Adventist people who would be allowed into New Jerusalem. All the outsiders would be destroyed. What were these visions like? These visions that she had around 2,000 of. She would go into a trance. She would begin shouting the word glory. She would shout it 3 times. Then she would fall to the floor, if no one was around to catch her. During this time, she lay with her eyes open, completely oblivious to what was going on around her, and both her heart rate and respiration rate slowed to an almost imperceptible level. Sometimes, upon returning from this trance state, she would remain blind for days. During these trances, she learned many things. One of the more interesting beliefs was that at the end, during the final confrontation with Satan, all of the sins of mankind in the world would be placed upon the devil himself, and then he would be plunged into the lake of fire. This, of course, directly contradicts the idea that the sins of the world were actually placed upon Jesus Christ. In fact, under that theology, Satan is taking the place of Christ. Of course, their most famous teaching is that the seventh day of the week still remains the Sabbath, remains a holy day, and in fact that the mark of the beast written of in the book of Revelation is to work on the Sabbath and not keep it holy, and to observe Sunday as a Sabbath instead. Even more strict than the Jehovah's Witnesses when it comes to what one can and cannot imbibe or do, butter, tea, coffee, medicine, tobacco, and alcohol were strictly forbidden. Seventh-day Adventists of today are not forced to be vegetarians, but the ones who are vegetarians are typically viewed as better Seventh-day Adventists. They're seen as more pious. Among the many other things that White was told during these visions that she received in her trances was the knowledge that Jesus Christ was in fact Michael the Archangel. Interestingly, both the Bible student group of Charles Taze Russel and the Seventh-day Adventists of Ellen G. White both had their origins in the Millerite Adventist movement. Yet the Millerite Adventist movement did not teach that Jesus Christ was Michael the Archangel, and there was no direct connection between the Seventh-day Adventists and the Bible students group or the later Jehovah's Witnesses. Somehow both of these groups, which schismed off of the exact same group, managed to come to the same conclusion about the nature of Jesus Christ, a conclusion which had never been seen or spoken of previously, and which had its origins in the trances and visions of one woman. This was not the end of Spiritism and trances and visions being used to teach the idea that Jesus Christ was Michael the Archangel. The New World Translation of the Holy Scriptures, which is the name that was given to the Bible that is used by the Jehovah's Witnesses, has many scriptures that have been subtly altered in order to remove the deity of Jesus Christ and make him into a god, so that it can further be stated that he was Michael the Archangel. Since clearly Michael the Archangel is not God, any scripture that mentions that Jesus Christ was God would have to be altered in some way. The most famous, of course, is probably John chapter 1, but there are many others. Here we find another connection to Ellen White. The so-called translators of the New World Translation of the Holy Scriptures did not simply choose which parts they wanted to change in order to fit in with their theology. It is at this point that we have to introduce Johannes Greber. Johannes Greber was a spiritualist and an occultist, and he also wrote his own translation of the New Testament of the Bible. The Watchtower Society was very familiar with him. In their booklet titled, "What Do the Scriptures Say About Survival After Death?" they wrote, "It comes as no surprise that one Johannes Greber, a former Catholic clergyman, has become a spiritualist and has published the book entitled Communication with the Spirit World, Its Laws, and Its Purpose. In its foreword he makes the typical misstatement, the most significant spiritualistic book is the Bible." In the February 15th, 1956 issue of the Watchtower, they wrote, "Says Johannes Greber in the introduction of his translation of the New Testament, copyrighted in 1937, I myself was a Catholic priest, and never as much believed in the possibility of communicating with the world of God's spirits. The day came, however, when I involuntarily took my first step toward such communication. My experiences are related in a book that has appeared in both German and English and bears the title Communication with the Spirit World, Its Laws, and Its Purpose." Greber endeavors to make his New Testament read very spiritualistic. Ex-priest Greber believes spirits helped him in his translation. The same article also says, "In keeping with his Roman Catholic extraction, Greber's translation is bound with a gold leaf cross on its stiff front cover. Very plainly the spirits in which ex-priest Greber believes helped him in his translation." So once again, we can see that the Watchtower Society was very aware that Greber was a spirit medium and an occultist. They said so in their own publications.